Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we delve into this extraordinarily iconic incident in UFO history, the crash in July of 1947 near Roswell, New Mexico, of alien craft. This topic has been very much in the news recently. As Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, which we referred to numerous times before, has risen to #1 in the New York Times bestseller list. He was just interviewed on NBC, very mainstream American broadcast channel. He recites the story contained in his book of taking on the task of the aerial threat identification program in the Pentagon and beginning to look at the UFO phenomenon as a national security issue and meeting various people, including Hal Puthoff, who has been involved in the UFO domain for at least 40 years, maybe longer. And it was Hal Puthoff that told him that Roswell actually happened. And you can read and hear, depending on whether you're reading the book or listening to the interview, Lou Elizondo's complete incredulity that he was being told by someone extremely well informed that the Roswell crash took place. And in fact, there were two, not just one craft, and that alien bodies deceased were gathered up, and there were 4 or 5 alien bodies. This is an important development in the overall conversation concerning UFO, UAP disclosure, because to the degree to which we can ascertain incontrovertible facts about alien visitation to planet Earth, that's the degree to which we can all accept as given that this phenomenon is real. And Roswell is the classic case. It's the source code, really, of the modern UFO phenomenon. We at Ubiquity University and also at New Paradigm Institute, we are offering training programs in the history, facts, politics, law, and technology of this extraordinary domain. One of the courses that's coming up starting this Thursday is by Donald Schmidt, who I'll introduce in a moment, who's the world's leading expert and investigator on Roswell. He's written multiple best-selling books. He worked with the astronomer Hynek and his Center for UFO Studies. He's the American representative of the International Coalition on Extraterrestrial Studies. He's a consultant and lead investigator to the Roswell Museum on UFO phenomena. And he's going to be teaching the course. So today, Don is going to be providing us with a summary of what's going to be covered in his course, but we'll put the link in the chat. We encourage everyone to go to ubiquityuniversity.org, and right there on the homepage, you'll see a link to the course, also the New Paradigm Institute.org. So you're all welcome to take this very important course. The better informed we are, the more reliably we can speak with others, and the more disclosure will begin to gain momentum, both in the United States and globally. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising. And I now introduce Don Schmidt, who's going to make an initial presentation, and then I'll circle back for a dialogue for the balance of the time. Welcome, Don.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for that very humbling introduction, and humbling in that, as you had mentioned, I got to work with, he was my teacher, my mentor, my dear friend, the eminent astronomer, Dr. Jalen Hynek, who will go down in history as the foremost authority on the subject of UFOs. So much so that even Steven Spielberg sought him out and used the very title of one of his classifications on determining and essentially assigning the investigative tasks of investigating UFOs, and that being the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I know in the closing years of Dr. Hynek's life, there's even talk of doing a sequel, that there would be a follow-up to that most famous movie, a movie that I should mention has internationally grossed about $500 million. So it's one of the biggest movies of all time. And so happy that our Center for UFO Studies in Chicago was associated with that. But I feel I come from very good stock in the regard that we had a different philosophy, a different approach to investigating the phenomenon, in that we just did not automatically assume, classify something as a UFO until investigation. With us, it was the opposite. We would investigate something, we would eliminate all the prosaic, all the conventional, most likely, most practical explanations as to the experience. And then and only then, when we would eliminate all given earthly possibilities, would we assign the very term UFO. So our record was typically about 95% explained. But I can assure all of you, it was that remaining 5% that were the hardcore, that left little doubt as to, after thorough professional investigation, that we were dealing with something extraordinary, that we were dealing with something beyond the pale, very often involving multiple independent witnesses, radar confirmation, both military and civilian eyewitnesses to a given experience. And so that's why we feel that our investigation of the UFO phenomenon is the hardcore. It's the best. And we actually require that they are the very best cases that we can then present to the public, we can present as far as to the scientific community, with the hope that they will share in our own involvement, our own research in this phenomenon, which we consider the greatest story of the millennium. And it just happens to be at the very top of that phenomenon, and that being the Roswell Incident of 1947. I can't emphasize enough that I was a total skeptic, that when we went down to New Mexico to conduct an independent investigation of this case that had been languishing in the shadows, it had been explained away within 5 hours of the announcement that the Roswell Army Airfield, which just happened to be the headquarters of the first atomic bomb squadron in the world. So we're not talking about, just a bunch of grunts, a bunch of enlisted men, a bunch of lightweights. Everyone on that base back in 1947 had a top security clearance for the atomic bomb. And it was the 509 Bomb Wing, which was a composite squadron, where they selected the best officers, best pilots, crew, doctors, nurses. If you swept a broom back on that base back in 1947, it was because you were the best sweeper in the entire U.S. military. You had a top security clearance for the atomic bomb nonetheless. And if we go by the very data of the Air Force's Project Blue Book, the most famous of the three official investigations of the UFO phenomenon, there were more UFO sightings in New Mexico than anywhere else in the world at that time. It was as though someone else was very interested in our military potential. And what better place than New Mexico, headquarters of the first atomic bomb squadron. First atomic bomb was detonated in 1945, just 2 years before, in New Mexico, just 2 hours west of Roswell. You had all the testing of the captured German V-2 rockets post-World War II at the White Sands Proving Grounds. You had all the ongoing research on atomic energy at Los Alamos, just to the northwest of Albuquerque. So it was truly the hotbed of military research and testing at that time. And so you had the arrival of the flying saucers, the flying discs, and a concentration on that very region. And in the late evening of July 2nd, 1947, there was a crash. A rancher would discover a huge debris field of some of the strangest material that neither he, other ranchers, hired hands, and then reporting it in Roswell to the law enforcement office there, the sheriff's office in Chavez County. So the sheriff, his deputies, and then contacting the military and going all the way up to the very base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. No one is able to identify this very exotic, this very strange wreckage. So they would be sent out as far as 2 intelligence officers, Major Jesse Marcel, as well as a counterintelligence officer, Captain Sheridan Cabot, to investigate. The next day, they would gather up, load up wreckage, fill up 2 entire vehicles, and on Tuesday, July 8th, the Roswell Army Airfield would issue that famous press release that they had actually captured a flying saucer. In other words, the first atomic bomb squadron in the world actually announced they had got one. We captured a flying saucer. 5 hours later, it was all explained away as being nothing more than a weather balloon with a radar reflector kite, neoprene rubber, reflective foil, wooden sticks, string, and tape. In other words, the very people in charge of the atomic bomb couldn't identify materials that a 5-year-old child would have readily recognized. So there's a tremendous disconnect right there. And what's amazing is that the United States government still maintains that explanation, though a variation on that same balloon, but the same materials. Well, that's where we came in. And as I had mentioned, by conducting our own independent investigation with the high expectations that we would side with that balloon explanation or with something just as conventional, little did we know that in interviewing firsthand witness after witness after witness who were describing those strange characteristics of the materials, the wreckage, which they held in their very hands, that this in no way resembled a balloon, an aircraft of any sort, a rocket, nothing. In other words, we had to leave New Mexico with the heavy thought, and not only that this was weighing on us to the extent that, my God, we need to get back down here as soon as possible, but the very consideration of what if we're wrong? What if our perceptions, which were strictly based on government, information, the powers that be that had explained this all away, had swept under the carpet with the hope that it would just all die within the press and nothing more to see here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's all go back to our regular routines and leave it to us. Well, we left it to them. And for over 40 years, by the time we became involved, it just languished. It just sat there waiting for us to start knocking on doors and tracking down witnesses and demonstrating that the first press release was the correct one, that all the eyewitnesses who were there, who could describe to us not only the materials, but the remains of the craft, all the way to the crew, the bodies which were recovered, that we were dealing with something off the planet. We were dealing with a craft of unknown origin and its crew. And to me, once again, it makes it the granddaddy of all UFO cases, because it isn't something just fleeting, something that now you see it, now you don't. This is something that we can take into a laboratory. This is something that the United States government remains in possession of. This is something that, as they assimilated it into the private sector, where United States government / government military doesn't manufacture anything. Every bullet, every plane, every ship, every tank, you name it, is all produced, all manufactured within the private sector. So there was no doubt that they had to provide this to the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the Los Alamoses, the Battelles, the Rand, the Hughes aircraft, Bureau Standards, General Electrics, which we all have firsthand witnesses to, that they had received the Roswell wreckage for testing and analysis with the hope that they would find the on button. So that also became part of our investigation, the hunt, the chase, as to the final disposition of all that proof. Because we don't have to wait for the next sighting. We don't have to wait for the next landing. The government has the proof. And that's where at Ubiquity and New Paradigm and all of my colleagues there, and within the course that I will be starting this Thursday, we're going to be demonstrating that the answers are within grasp. We have them here on Mother Earth. We have the people that we can then put pressure on, the elected officials, the special select committees that need to investigate this further and need to provide immunity to whistleblowers, to people who can provide them with the roadmap, who can steer them in the direction where that proof lies today. Lou Elizondo new book, and I applaud his effort, and I applaud as far as that he has been recently championing as far as our efforts. But every time I have met with Lou, it's like, go get them, but you know where to go if you want answers. You know who to go to, because we've walked the walk. We were the ones who originally tracked down and interviewed all of those witnesses, now sadly gone. We often would comment that we were racing with The Undertaker. And sadly, The Undertaker is one. We're presently trying to track down an 87-year-old woman. And the only lead I have is that she drives a white minivan. She's up in the mountain areas of central New Mexico. And when she was 10 years old, for living out in that area, her parents, who had been out to the crash site, managed to retrieve a piece of the wreckage. So she got to hold it. And her description that I've heard secondhand is precisely as all the others before her have described us. So we're frantically, in fact, without giving out details, I will be making another effort very shortly to find her, to get her on the record, with the hope that we add her to the long list of first-hand witnesses who, before their calling, before their passing, that they were able to describe to us, to put on the record that they handled a piece of material that was not manufactured here on planet Earth. Now, in Lou's book, he describes that there were two objects. And I think there's some confusion as to two crashes, when in reality, there were multiple sites concerning the one crash, the one incident. And we'll be going into that in much greater detail throughout the course as well, because we have firsthand witnesses that took us, who led us, took us by the hand and said, this is where this happened. This is where we saw this. He's correct about the number of bodies. That's exactly what we have been stating as far as through the course of our investigation, that there were 4 bodies recovered, 2 at one site and 2 at another site. And we will be going into much greater detail as to what we know about those particular locations and the fact that we have been there. We have had archaeological digs even at those sites, still looking for physical evidence. Now, one thing that was not covered in Lou Lozano's book that we also will be getting into is that there was a survivor, one survivor. We have firsthand military as well as civilian testimony to that effect as well, and where it was taken from Roswell and then what became of it. And then we have firsthand witnesses who observed it away from the base facility in Roswell. So there's a trail, there's a chain of activity also demonstrating that most amazing piece of this whole puzzle, that there was a live one. This investigation that we're going to be going on, and as this class, as this course will proceed, we're going to recreate, we're going to follow in our footsteps. We're going to demonstrate investigating, as the case should be with Roswell, the ultimate cold case investigation. All of my colleagues were telling me that it was impossible. How do you go back and investigate something at the time that happened over 40 years ago? How do you track down witnesses, especially back at a time where we didn't have the internet, we didn't have as far as the means to actually enter a name and see what possible addresses or phone numbers would come up. We had to actually track down people with nothing more than, well, I think they lived in this state, or they looked like this back in 1947, and I don't know their appearance right today, but that's how we really sunk our teeth into this investigation. Because for every setback, every failure, we had successes. And within 2 years of our investigation, we had tracked down over 300 witnesses. That's how fervent, that's how, as far as committed we were, because we realized we were dealing with something that monumental, that earth-shaking. And we wanted to also stay one step ahead of the powers that be, should they ever see the need to shut us down, to stop us. And for that reason, we made sure a lot of light was shining on us, that we were public, that we were doing a tremendous amount of media. We quickly came out with our first book, which would then be made into the Golden Globe nominated movie Roswell. So we even had a movie that stepped to the fore and drew a lot of global attention to the case. And here we are, over 30 years later, and the government being up to 4 official explanations regarding this one incident. We have to date interviewed over 600 witnesses, either directly or indirectly involved, and down to a man, woman, and child, if that was the case, back in 1947. They have stated on the record through sworn affidavits, video depositions, deathbed confessions, that it was the first press release, which was the correct one, that they had indeed captured a flying saucer, a craft of unknown origin, and its crew. How much bigger story do we need to look into? And that's what's going to be so wonderful about this course, because we're going to, once again, reinvestigate this. I anticipate and I encourage a lot of interaction from the participants as to, well, coulda, shoulda, woulda, as to the witnesses. Why didn't they do this? Why did they say this? And always with the facts as they presently stand as our foundation, as our fallback. And that's where I am so excited, because I'm sure I will learn things as well, that the students will be providing me with more ammunition, provide me with more information as to what we may have overlooked, things that we could still pursue, things that we could still look into. So it's going to go both ways. One of the particular classes, for example, we're going to focus on deathbed confessions. And as we all know, deathbeds are admissible in a court of law. The judicial system, the Justice Department, has just long accepted and long concluded that people do not lie on their deathbeds. It's why we see movies, we hear examples of where a member of the clergy, a priest, will go to as far as someone on death row, for that final confession, an admission of the crime, of the heinous event that may have necessitated, their conviction, that type of thing. And the difference with Roswell is that they're not confessing to crimes, they're confessing to something, again, that they were sworn to secrecy over. They were threatened. Their families were threatened. We're going to be doing entire classes as to how do you deal with reluctant witnesses, people who are just basically fearful of government reprisal. How do we work around that? What tools, as far as remedial, as far as resources, can we provide them on the legal front to enable them to talk? And hence, these would have been the earliest of whistleblowers at a time when they were not provided with immunity. And we did seek such immunity for our witnesses, but unfortunately always failing. But nonetheless, we set the groundwork for where we presently are. And so that's where I'm also excited, in that these witnesses and their families can now smile with the anticipation, with the optimism that as long as we are still pushing for disclosure, that Roswell will continue to rise to the top, that Roswell is still the granddaddy of all UFO cases. And as a result, I can't imagine any other incident that we could go on for years providing classes, courses as to individual witnesses. The very methodology, the systematic as far as investigation of a case, a cold case that concerns something that important, that monumental. And that's where Roswell stands today. I love the fact that I have been given this opportunity, the fact that Roswell has once again been given an opportunity to present its best case. And those who take this course are going to be going along for the ride. They're going to be involved. We're going to interact as we reinvestigate this from phase to phase, stage to stage, to the point that we're relying on families. We're beyond the first-hand witnesses. And so the case remains fluid. And as a result, we're still investigating, as I'd mentioned, trying to find this one of these last first-hand witnesses. So welcome, join us for the ride of a lifetime, in that the closer we get to demonstrating that Roswell indeed did happen, we're talking about solving the entire UFO mystery overnight. And that's all it would take. Piece of the wreckage, piece of remains that would demonstrate, the DNA of something not here from this planet. Exciting case. And please consider the possibility of getting on this roller coaster and going for the ride of a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Splendidly done. What an extraordinary adventure of a lifetime, really. for you? Because I think of all the cases that you've delved into and investigated, Roswell has been the preeminent case. Would that be an accurate statement?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, we're talking about people who, eyewitnesses who could say, I held it in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
So you're one step away from someone who is swearing that they held a piece of a flying saucer, of something manufactured off the planet in their hands. And you shake hands with them, and it's like, again, and then it's the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And one by one, you realize, short of experiencing that yourself,
Yeah,
it's the next best thing. It's the next best thing.
yeah. Now let's just back up to, it was really 30 years ago or longer when you and Hynek and others began to investigate. Tell us the story of how it all began. How did you first come into contact with Roswell? How did you and the center begin to think through a strategy? Tell us that story of origin.
I had just been appointed Director of Special Investigations at the jail and Hynek Center for UFO Studies. And that was in 1988. So it was 2 years after Dr. Hynek had passed away. And I wanted to go for broke. I wanted to go after, the very idea that the United States government has in their very possession physical remains, that they've actually retrieved something of an unearthly origin. But again, I was a skeptic, total skeptic. I just could not believe that they could contain, that they could keep secret something of that magnitude after all that time. And the late nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman was the original investigator, the father of Roswell, in the respect that he had interviewed the very head of intelligence of the Roswell Army Airfield from 1947, that being the late Major Jesse Marcel Sr. And Marcel is the one who was ordered to pose with the substituted weather balloon device, where they did the old switcheroo, and they had retracted the flying saucer announcement and claimed that it was just a big misidentification by the very people in charge of the atomic bomb who couldn't recognize the balloon. Okay, fine. Well, Friedman was the first one. And then he realized how important the case was, and that became his preeminent investigation at that time. And he'd been talking to dozens and dozens of eyewitnesses. And I helped him at a lecture he was doing at Lake College in Northern Illinois. And he invited me down. We had dinner earlier, and I knew Stan very well at that time. And I really, every time we wouldn't even talk about Roswell, because again, I was not interested. Had no interest whatsoever. But at a previous board meeting, the center, we had talked about, well, why don't you ask Stan if he feels they've talked to all the eyewitnesses, if they've really have focused on the principal individuals involved, and if there was nothing more they could do about this case. And so I'm backstage with Stan, and I broached the question. I asked, and he went, "Oh no, Don, there's got to be hundreds of," and that's all I had to hear, not just a few. When he said hundreds, it was like the light bulb went on, and it's like, okay. And then I said, well, what if we were to help you? And he was, Don, by all means, I can't do this all alone, and we can't get to them in time because they're all aging, and we've already missed quite a few of them due to age. And we would set up the first trip to New Mexico in the fall of 1988. In February, we would make that first trip, again, confident that we would sew this all up. Nothing to see here. And after 4 days, it was like, we have to get down here as soon as possible, because we realized we were onto something very big. We also realized that, what if we're wrong and we treat this nonchalantly. We act as though we're just investigating this like a standard UFO case, and it slaps us down and we can't recover. So we decided from that time on, we were going to treat it like the real thing, that we were actually on the playing field with the very arbiters of the cover-up, and that they would also be watching, they would be monitoring, and that we had to anticipate them. We had to foremost respect eyewitness confidentiality. We had to earn their confidence and create a comfort level for them in which to speak with us. So we immediately advanced the ball without even having the ball in our possession, so to speak, to use that analogy again. And I think it did us well in that one by one, as we were finding the eyewitnesses, the first words out of their mouth would be, "My God, how did you find me?" Or "Who told you about me?" And again, we would never reveal sources. No, never. But we were demonstrating a level of professionalism and confidence and a level of commitment that, okay, we started this and we see this as it is developing and as it is growing to be potentially the disclosure case, the one case that could indeed blow this wide open overnight, because we're no longer pointing up at the sky, we're pointing to Washington. We're saying, you have the proof. You've been deceiving the public now at that time for over 40 years. And we then attempted to also enlist government assistance, as we eventually would in a couple of years with the late Congressman Stephen Schiff. We were in contact already with the late Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona. And he was encouraging us, and he was telling us as far as who had confided to him. And it was precisely people from Roswell who told him what had happened back in 47. So we also realized we needed to knock on the doors of people in high places. Sure, we were looking for, the enlisted men who were the more apt to speak to us, because they weren't they weren't at the risk of losing their pensions and their benefits. The officers are always the most difficult because they have the most to lose. But we were still hitting them from both angles. And I think that's another way in which we caught them with their pants down, so to speak, because we were approaching this from every direction possible. And in just surmising this quick point, Jim, it's a point that I make with the media whenever they interview someone in the government / the military, that they have to realize they're dealing with someone who is highly compartmentalized. They only have access, they only know which they know. And no disrespect intended. I consider him a dear friend, but Lou Elizondo, he is still compartmentalized. He only has access to that which he has access to. Because we were not
confidentiality.
Yes,
confidentiality.
And he's only able to say what they allow him to say, what they give him permission to say and put in his book. I'm not under such restrictions. We have, and I can't tell you, Jim, how often, and we've been to the Pentagon a number of times, and we still have our contacts at the Pentagon, and we've had the late astronaut Edgar Mitchell do the foreword to one of our books, and Dr. David Helyar at Cornell, who worked with Carl Sagan for 30 years, and the late Governor Bill Richardson of New Mexico wrote a foreword to one of our books. And they're all encouraging us to finish it, that we're the ones who are still restricted. We're the ones who are still handcuffed. There's only so far we can go. But you guys, you're not. And you can attack this from every angle, every direction. And we've done that. We've done that. And that's where I truly feel that we not only have done a service to the UFO community, but to the world as a whole. Because Roswell has become a household word globally. And I know that by being invited, I've lectured through China, Australia, Japan, throughout South America. I had dinner one evening in Moscow with two of the cosmonauts, and this is all they wanted to talk about: Roswell, Roswell, Roswell. So we've made tremendous headway, and now with the International Coalition, and Roswell is, at the top of, our spearhead in our effort regarding all that. But I know it's a long answer, but it was a progression. It was a growth, and I think it's also laying out what my course is going to be about. In that, even if you should join us as an agnostic, as even a skeptic, that once you start walking the walk and once you get into the very shoes of the people who were there, and we ask you to step back and always look at it from that outside vantage point, it's going to raise a lot more questions. And those questions, you're going to realize the answers still in line with the very witnesses who could say,
Uh-oh. We may have lost Don here.
Yes, it looks like he froze up. I think he will rejoin as soon as possible.
Yeah, Don, you've frozen if you can hear us, and you might want to close out and rejoin or refresh. But while he's doing that, everyone, I just want to say a word about Don himself, who I've met, and Georg and I have the pleasure of knowing and working with. He's an absolutely straight shooter. There's no shadow of turning. He's completely dedicated. He spent really his life as an investigator on Roswell. So when we talk about Roswell, Don Schmidt is the guy that knows more about it than probably anybody else alive. So to have him offer a course, actually 2 courses, is going to be a series of 8 weeks that I would strongly urge you to avail yourself to. There you go. Hi, Don.
I guess you didn't like what we were speaking about, Jim.
I was just taking a moment to sing your praises, but
I
now
heard that.
we're back. Let me ask an additional couple questions, and then I know your time is short today, so we'll let you go. But as far as you know, is the investigation essentially over? I mean, it's 600 people. You've exhaustively researched it now for decades. Would it be a time where you could say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I've made my case, and now you have to be the judge? Or is there more work to do? It seems to me that you've exhaustively researched this.
Thank you, Jim. I've had 2 research partners, 2 investigative partners in the past, Kevin D. Randle, and then my most recent partner after all these years, Thomas J. Carey. And Tom is retired from the field over the last couple of years. And it's in his attitude is basically, Don, we've taken it as far as we can. And as far as we should be concerned, we've proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt, and there's nothing more to do. Well, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm still very fluid. I'm still working on this. I'm still trying to track down this possible first-hand witness. I'm still tracking down families.
Fantastic.
People who we may have missed, their father or a grandfather, who maybe confided, who said something to them in the final days of their life. Those are deathbeds, and to me, those are still so important. And I know our good friend Danny Sheehan, as a lawyer, would agree that when secondhand testimony corroborates firsthand, it solidifies the firsthand, not the other way around.
Yes.
And so the fact that even within the families, and when we get the deathbeds, it continues to amaze us that how can anyone, after just hundreds of eyewitnesses, just declare them all as liars, that they were incapable of recognizing a balloon of common off-the-shelf materials that a child would have recognized? And the very fact that these people were subjected to the level of intimidation and physical threats, clearly demonstrating that the government went to extreme measures to shut this down.
Sure.
It's one of the things that, and I just finished up my latest book, which is Roswell, entitled Roswell versus the United States Government. And where chapter after chapter, I demonstrate all the First Amendment violations, all the civil rights violations, all the human rights violations, and then going through the process of sworn affidavits and depositions and deathbed confessions, and then presenting this as though within a court of law, and then having attorney commentary at the end of each chapter, how they broke the law regarding this, how they broke the law regarding due process. And then I have a retired judge who's doing my foreword. So we're hitting them in the courtroom of public opinion, nonetheless, but nonetheless also demonstrating that if the skeptics still would like to debate this, now you're talking about, now you're going to have to challenge the law. You're going to have, the onus is on you to demonstrate why would the FCC, for example, why would they have been threatening the media in Roswell to shut this down, to stop providing any additional media announcements on the incident, with loss of license, should they continue? My God, just imagine that should happen today. That the FCC would threaten to take someone's license away for reporting on, the news. But that's precisely what happened at the time of. So, Mr. Skeptic, cite another example where that ever happened. So,
well, it's an extraordinary, important point you're making. Roswell is not only the classic case of a UFO incident, it's the classic case of cover-up and information repression, and intimidation. Yes. I would say most of the people that you talked with were quiet because they were so severely intimidated.
Yes.
So this is the classic case of cover-up and the classic UFO incident at the same time.
That's the wonderful thing about Roswell. That's what's going to be great about this course, in that it essentially encompasses every possible aspect of not only a UFO incident, a UFO report, but any human event throughout the course of history, because we essentially are going to be reinvestigating a crime. We're going to return to the scene of the crime, but all minus a crime, except that we're going to also then demonstrate that the response, the official response, was criminal.
Yeah, was the crime.
Was the crime, not the event. And that's why I'm glad, Jim, that you always, as we do, we refer to us as a cover-up. It's not a conspiracy. A cover-up in the fact that it's a documented fact that something crashed. It's a documented fact that they announced they captured a flying saucer. It's a documented fact that they explained it away within hours, that it was nothing more than a misidentified weather balloon device. But it's also a documented fact that there are hundreds of first-hand witnesses who swore that it did happen all the way to their deathbeds. That is not arguable. And the fact that the United States government, in their subsequent 3 official explanations, have 0 witnesses. So again, who would win in a courtroom? We would have been able to provide dozens of first-hand witnesses, witness after witness after witness, and the only thing they would have been able to provide are government position, individuals who would just, maintain the status quo, and that, I say it didn't happen, so as a result, it didn't happen. That's not what history is, comprised of.
No.
That's the other thing that this course is going to demonstrate, that history is essentially the records of eyewitnesses, the testimonies of eyewitnesses, who then essentially create the mosaic, put together the picture of what has transpired. And then you have the reporters, you have the historians who have written it down, and then are able to exchange notes and compare notes, and finally arrived at a certain point where this is the accepted version of what transpired. Well, that's where, and you are correct about that, that's where we are today with Roswell. There is an acceptance. I know, for example, on ABC Nightline, when Ted Koppel was still hosting, and they had their telephone poll regarding Roswell. And it was like 87% of the respondents said that they were convinced it did happen. So once again, who not only is winning, but who's won? Who's won? Can you imagine any election and you would receive 87% of the votes? I think that's quite a mandate. And so, but it will continue because the adventure remains. We're planning on another archaeological dig at the debris field site, a debris field that covered an area of almost a mile long. So there's still much ground to cover. And one of the things, for example, Jim, that we're going into next time is with subterranean radar drones that we can cover a month, because in the past when we'd use subterranean radar, it's a ground unit that you have to push back and forth. And if you can imagine a full square mile, it's quite a good amount of territory. But now with the drones, because we have that technology, we can bombard the site. And so there again, as Dr. Hynek would call it, the little boy wonderment, that you peer at the stars at night and you just let your imagination go wild. And so that's what happens with me with Roswell. It's not that my imagination goes wild. The eyewitnesses already have created, the movie in my mind of what took place. And it's now a case of where I don't need to prove it to myself any longer, but I want everyone else to share in that level of excitement, of enthusiasm, and to bring this to a head where we finally get disclosure and they can say, Roswell, as Lou just stated in his book, that Roswell did happen, and I can walk away and go, mission accomplished.
Don Schmidt, everyone, Thursday at 2:00 Eastern time, you can participate in the course. I put the link in the chat. You can go to ubiquityuniversity.org or newparadigminstitute.org and find the course and register. Don, thank you. You're doing a historic service for the future of humankind. And I want to acknowledge both your perseverance, but the historic dimension of what it is that you've been doing for all these years. It's going to go down in the history books, my friend.
Well, thank you. And it's wonderful in that it can often be said that we people with a mission, we can become a bit obsessed. It's not an obsession. It's not, in as much as we're well grounded. We're involved in other things. It enables us to retain our perspective. It's like an artist stepping back from his painting and seeing what needs to still be done. But I love your passion and the fact that we're working together mutually towards this goal. And the fact, as I have often said, it doesn't matter who wins, because when we succeed, we all succeed. The world succeeds. Absolutely. Truth has prevailed, and that's where I can't say how flattered and how humbled and honored I am to be working with you, Ubiquity, New Paradigm, and let's finish the job, and we can both say mission accomplished.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, everyone. See you Thursday for Don's course. Bye for now.
Thank you all.